Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Mahlon.
And we're here for another episode. Of our podcast. I'm about ready to just give in and say we're just going with it. I
don't even want to mention it anymore. Whatever word comes out of our mouth, that's what we're going to go with.
It's what's going to be. It's what it's going to be. No, we're here for another episode where we're going to share perspectives and learn about something new and grow our horizons moment by moment, right?
Now, those are some pretty lofty goals, but yes, they all sounded really nice.
Dude, aim for the moon and you'll land amongst the stars. Isn't that what they say?
Oh, yeah, that's what they say.
Oh, shush. Okay. So how have you been? In the last, we just recorded a couple days ago. So how have you been in the last 24 hours?
I was going to say, it's been good since we talked, 15 minutes ago. But no, again, something that's going on. I'm trying to think of something different. So we had a kind of, some major storms come through today with some wicked lightning. And so it just got done running kids all around, got them all situated. My son was going to play football. He's the one that's in 6th grade, and I no more dropped him off, drove the 20 minutes home so I could have dinner before we recorded tonight. And I was home for maybe a minute before they said, we saw lightning, we need you to come pick up your kid. So I have been doing nothing but running around like a taxi service all evening.
Those are the moments where you're like, why didn't I just stay in the parking lot? I knew this was coming. Why didn't I just stay in the parking lot? Because I knew this was coming.
These are the moments where I'm like, why did we even listen to the coach? We should have just used our parental brain and said, you're not going tonight.
You can go tomorrow. That's true. Until they get older, and then missing practices makes them, get in trouble with the coach. So,
well, and I told my son who's in high school, I said, do you want me to go talk to the coach? He's like, Dad, I got it. Don't worry about it. So I'm like, okay.
No,
yeah, I talked to him, and he did it very tactfully, because afterwards I was like, that could have gone one of two ways. And I was really appreciative of how he handled it, because he was like, no, Dad, I got this. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, okay, son, I got your back.
Next year, he's going to be in college, and you're going to be like, hey, do you want me to go talk to that professor? Thanks, Dad.
No, I offer my dad's services, and the kids, as they get older, as it's intended, they stop using it more and more. So, that sounds like prep for sadness. So, what about you? What's going on with you?
I don't even want to. Just puppy. That's all. Just puppy.
For the
my whole life.
For the next 6 months, Jamie, puppy, exclamation point.
Yes. How are you? Puppy, puppy, puppy. No bite. Puppy, puppy, potty, outside. Puppy.
And then an occasional tearful breakdown while you scream puppy. And then back to just puppy.
For real. No.
I actually have a food for thought that I think is going to be kind of fun, courtesy of my daughter. So I'm kind of excited to kind of introduce it. So
wait, is this like I have a question food for thought?
I think this is a more of a, I don't know if it's in question form, but I think it's one for me. When I heard it, I was like, no, that's not, wait a minute. It has multiple, it's like an onion. It's like a question onion. You hear it and you're like, okay, I know what that is. And then you peel the first layer back and you're like, wait a minute, it can go deeper. So it starts off fun. And that's what kind of drew me to it. Is I'm like, we've had, several food for thoughts, but have we ever started one with a little bit of fun? And this question's just fun.
Okay. Hit me.
Okay.
With your question.
Here's the question. Can you have a hero, or can you have heroes without having villains?
Can you have heroes without having villains? Well, I don't know, Mahlon. Who's your villain?
Well, now you have to unwrap it, because at first you're like, yeah, you can have heroes without villains. What are you talking about? And then at first, because of my Marvel background and I'm a nerd, I was like, of course you can. But then it's like, but what's their purpose? And that's when the first onion layer slipped for me. I was like, but would you call them a hero if there was nobody that they'd ever have to fight against as a villain? Or would they just be normal people?
Oh, yeah.
What heroic act would they have to do if there was no villain who would cause mayhem to do it? And again, I know we're talking like Marvel right now, but even in real life, like, could you ever be a good person or a hero to somebody else if there wasn't an antagonist or a villain that was causing some strife?
See, my thought is, yeah, you can have heroes without villains, but I guess that kind of depends. Like, if you could say, hey, my 3 heroes in my life are, who would you say your heroes are?
Well, I want to make sure I clarify. Are you talking people I look up to, or are you talking about true heroes?
Oh, we need to define hero.
See, again, another onion layer.
Layer. It is. It's like layer after layer. That'll do, donkey. That'll do.
So it's kind of interesting and fun to think about. But, when I think of a hero, to kind of start off the definition, I think of somebody who selfishly cares or helps in my life without needing any kind of recognition or payment, because they do it because they're either able to or because they want to. And it has an uplifting effect on my life. Those are the heroes of my life. And sometimes, life is the villain, right? Sometimes we don't need to have the villain in the form of a person. Sometimes just being an adult is a villain. And I think without those opportunities, those villainous moments, I almost think you wouldn't have the opportunity to be the hero or have someone be the hero for you. So as much as I wanted to argue with my daughter really extensively, because that's one of my favorite pastimes with all of my kids, I stopped and thought, and I was like, you know what? I think there's something to that. Like, it just made me scratch my head.
What's interesting is right after you started talking about that, it made me think of, there's like a saying that the death is what defines the condition of living, right? Like if there was no death, would there be living? Would you really know the difference? Or, before I can feel whole, I have to feel broken, right? And sometimes those opposites is what helps us define the hopeful things and the positive things. So it's almost, it kind of is, it's reeking a little oniony of that for me. Like, would I know what a hero was if I didn't know what a villain was, or if I didn't know what that strife or that challenge is? Would I know what success and triumph is? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and turn that a little bit more into the abstract, right? Would you ever know what a good day was if you never had a bad day? Would you know what prosperity was if you never experienced poverty to some extent? So, you start taking out the word hero and villain, or the persona or the person, and start making it just that conceptual thought. It starts unraveling quickly. And it's like, I think I grew up at a time when I was really young. My family really didn't have a lot of money. And I remember some of the things that we had to do just to get by, and some of the things that we had to go through. And fortunately, as I grew up and got older, my parents, got a little bit more successful, that all changed for us. But I always remembered as a kid those moments where it was a little bit harder, which made when it wasn't that much sweeter. And so I don't know if there's a golden rule somewhere within this. I know in life I've kind of heard something similar, but I almost think it's the yin and the yang. I think you have to have one to either, I don't know if I want to say you have to have one to have the other, but I think you should have one to appreciate the other more, or something to that effect.
No, that's a really good way of looking at it, I think, because, well, and you think about people who, not all people, but you think about some people who have always had wealth or who, born with a silver spoon kind of idea, do they really appreciate what they have as much as someone who hits it big and wins the lottery and it changes their life? Like that whole rags to riches story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And it's so interesting that my kids just a couple days ago were watching a YouTube video, and in the YouTube video, it was talking about how there was this politician, and this is all fictitious, but I think it was different real life scenarios, but they were portrayed by actors, and so it was not, it was played out. It wasn't happening live, is what I'm trying to say. And they had this person who was in politics, and they encountered a homeless person, and they've kind of just discarded this entire community because, in this person's mind, they're either drug addicts or they're lazy or whatever. They're choosing to be homeless, and they're just the filth of society. So they should just be, taken out, cast away somewhere else. And then it wasn't until, and I didn't see all of it, so I'm trying to piece together, but it wasn't until there was an event where the homeless person gave water to this politician, and it was, you follow the storyline, and it was one of their last 2 bottles of water. And the root and the moral of that whole story was, here you have 2 people who had no money, they had no place to live, they didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. All they had was this water because they were selling this water to make a little bit of income to buy food. And the last 2 bottles of water, they freely gifted it to this politician and this politician's daughter for no other reason than they needed it and they had it, so they gave it. And it kind of falls, into this whole section is, I know a lot of people that have so much that give so little, and I know some people that have so little and give so much. And it kind of falls into that whole yin and yang, right? Maybe they give because they know what it's like to not have, and so they're willing to give more than maybe some people who has never experienced that, and their tendencies are just to kind of hold on to what they have, even if they have a lot.
I think that is so true. And I can just think of people in my own life where, they've been in deep crisis and they've been in places that were so hard. And when they see someone in that place, they do everything they can to support someone in that space, to help them get the resources or whatever it is that they need to get out of that space. And sometimes I really feel like it's because they know what that means. They know how hard that really is. And so, oftentimes I feel like people who are helpers or people who help, they really do that out of deficit. They do that out of that space where they needed it, and they want to be there for someone else in that way too.
Yeah, I think I don't think that's everybody's situation. I think there's probably some generous people out there that have never had to suffer to the extent that some people have. But it makes you stop and think. It makes you go, as we talk about this whole villain hero mix, and you expand upon that, and it kind of comes out from just, like I said, having that person or that persona. I think, I'm going to go out on a ledge myself and say I think it helps make you appreciate it. I don't know if I'm really just ready to say that one is the result of the other or vice versa, but I definitely think one helps you appreciate the other a lot more so. Anyways, I just thought that was a kind of interesting food for thought that my daughter was able to kind of give us. So thank you. If you're listening, daughter, yes. Thank you.
I'm not one for raw onions often, but this was good to peel back. Thank you, Mahlon's daughter. That's awesome. All right. So as some of you may know, September is Suicide Awareness Month. And so we wanted to just explore what that means for people who have been impacted by suicide, people who have suffered from having those thoughts and feelings. And so we're bringing on a guest today. Our guest is Amanda Pearson. Amanda has done a lot of work in suicide prevention and suicide postvention. And so we just want to bring you on today, Amanda, and visit with you about that. How are you today?
I am good. Thank you guys for having me.
Yes, we're excited.
Hi, Amanda.
Hello, Mahlon.
So we want to start out, and I think if you've been in the work we do, you and I, Amanda, you have some understanding of the impact that suicide can have on families and on individuals, but not everybody has that experience. So I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about you and, your own personal experiences and what brings you to this work of suicide prevention and postvention.
Absolutely. So what, I guess kind of what my story is and what brought me to what I do today with the suicide prevention is I was married at 19 years old, and we had 2 kids. We had a house. Everything was great jobs. Sorry, I've got some allergies. And it was right after we had been married for 5 years that my husband just one day things just changed. He just wasn't the same man that I had been married to for the last 5 years. And so I just thought it was very off. We had done counseling together, and that didn't do anything other than increase, I guess, the offness, if you want to put it that way. And due to safety reasons, I had to leave with my children. And after bouncing around in safe houses and being moved everywhere, it felt like we were finally able to get our own place. And the day after we were able to move in, I received a phone call stating that my husband had died by suicide. And so that's kind of where my world changed, and what's led me to what I do now. Because at that time, just being 24 and a single mom of 2 kids, and I lost my house, I lost my job. I had to essentially kind of restart everything in my life, and alone. That was probably the worst part of it. I went through a lot of my own suicide experience after that, and I really, back then, I couldn't see the value of the experience. So I've learned to appreciate my life experiences, whether they're good or they're bad, because it's always a learning opportunity to me. And so for 5 years, I struggled with really, really bad suicidal ideation, depression. There were 6 times that I specifically remember that I had taken my kids somewhere else and was going to follow through with my suicide plan. And all 6 times I received a phone call or a text message. And that just kind of snapped me back into reality. Like, what the hell am I doing? And I would stop and I would cry and cry and cry. And I didn't understand any of it. Couldn't answer the why, like we all need to know why. Why did this happen? And there was no answer. I started my journey of healing after 5 years, because I kind of looked at myself one day and I was like, this isn't me. Like, I've lived through a lot of stuff, and why give up now? I've got 2 kids now that depend on me. And so I started counseling, which it worked at the time. It did what I needed it to do. And then after I hit about 10 years, so I was in counseling for 5 years, I decided to make my next step, and I joined the Central Nebraska Loss Team. And with that team, what I do is I'm a suicide survivor. So anytime that we have a suicide in our area, then we send out 2 survivors and a clinician to visit with the family. Mm-hmm. And that in itself has offered me so much healing, but then it's also made me explore, like, how can I help myself get better even more? How do I deal with this? Because now, you're sitting in a group of mourning people, and they're asking you that same question that you asked yourself, was why?
Right.
And you don't have those answers. Like, nobody has those answers. And so I started doing a little bit more intensive counseling. So I started doing what's called EMDR. Mm-hmm. And that has been the most amazing, life-saving, life-changing thing that I've ever experienced in my life. Because it helped me um, really process and really think about those feelings, because like the day that I got the phone call, I can remember the phone call, but I don't remember anything like within 48 hours afterwards. I don't remember the specifics of even really moving into my place.
Right. Well, and can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what is it? What was that like? I mean, I feel like in our culture, we throw around like, oh, I was so traumatized. We throw it around almost like a joke sometimes. Um, but that it sounds like a trauma response to me. Can you talk a little bit about, what that impact was for you after that happened, and why maybe some of those trauma responses happened for you?
So you're talking about like why the suicidal ideation and why I can't remember some of that stuff or wasn't able to remember some of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so through my exploration with EMDR, we have come to figure out that it's a form of disassociation to prevent your brain does this weird thing, and it protects you essentially is what it is. And so those really bad memories, we're just going to kind of erase those. We're going to tuck those back in this little box and nobody's going to access it. And so that was my response to it. The other response that I had was I lived for 5 years believing that my husband was drunk, because nobody in their right mind could kill themselves being stone cold sober.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what got me through, was I had to trick myself and make myself believe like this was the reason why.
Oh, that's to make it make sense.
Yeah, so my brain could quiet down and that suicidal ideation could quiet down.
So, Amanda, I have some questions from a perspective of I've never had to personally. I haven't known anybody personally who has committed suicide or tried to commit suicide. My family life has not ever had me come close to something like that. So this is all pretty foreign to me. But I do have some questions, and maybe I'm trying to look for some insights from somebody who someone like you who has had some of those experiences. Plus, the work that you're doing is right around suicide. So if you don't mind, I have some questions for me to try to better understand. And again, I'm not expecting you to give me all of those golden answers to say, here's everything from A to Z. But if you can impart some of that insight that you've learned, I think that would be very helpful for me and anybody that might be listening, because there are some misconceptions that I'm going to say that I have around suicide because I've never experienced it. I've never had to get as close to it as what you've gotten as close to it. So one of my first questions I want to ask you is, I associate that suicide is a selfish act from the person who's committing suicide. And I know when I say those words, that's very harsh, because the person that's committed suicide or thinking of suicide, they're going through a tremendous amount of things themselves. But I just want to talk to somebody that says, it seems it's very selfish because sometimes there's no answers to why. And I even heard you say that earlier, that you wanted to know why. There was no why. Well, can you kind of explain, or have you had any kind of conversations around individuals that you can maybe shed some light onto why would somebody want to take their life knowing that it's going to impact all these other lives, all these other people in their lives, and it's going to have that almost that I don't care what happens to you because I'm going to take my blocks and go home. And it's going to impact people, but I don't care that it impacts people. Because to me, that's the selfish element that I would say is associated with suicide.
And, a lot of people do believe that suicide is very selfish. But I can tell you from my own experience, so this is just my opinion on what I lived through and what I experienced myself, was when my husband died by suicide and I became suicidal, it was more so an emotional reaction. So with the sadness and the pain, that I had. Like my brain kept telling me, look what happened. Like, look what happened to your kids. Your kids deserve better than this. You're not a good person. Like these thoughts of just, I'm nothing, I'm nobody, really came onto me very heavy. And I started pushing people away. So like my family didn't ever know that I had struggled with suicide after my husband's death. I kept it very private. I pushed everybody away. I didn't want anything to do with anybody. Somebody came over or called, yep, I'm fine. That's just, you put on a different face. But then when you're left alone, those thoughts become so loud, and you're in such a dark place that it's just, you start to believe them.
Well, and you've also just started touching on another question that I had, which I think is really interesting, which is, again, I would think the people that are wanting to do this or eventually commit suicide, are they asking for help? Are they reaching out to individuals? Like part of my brain just said, have you reached out? Do people know that you're hurting as much as you are? Have you done everything that you can do? Like I naturally want to start talking to that person to say, what else could you have done? And I don't know if that's a fair question to ask them, but I do think, are there signs to that? Is people that put on the brave face, like how would somebody who's interacting with someone who is thinking about that would even know, or how would they even be able to help? I mean, I know that's kind of two separate questions kind of wrapped up in one, but my first one that I'll just leave on the table, which is, are they calling out for help and people are just ignoring them, or are they just kind of trying to internalize that and make it through the day?
So I did not reach out for any help. And the reason why I did not is because I didn't want people judging me. I didn't want to lose what I had left, and that was my kids. And so I internalized a lot of that. A lot of people, I can't say a lot of people because I only know from my own experience. I just know that, like I said, it was too embarrassing for me to reach out. I didn't want people to know that I was struggling because, then I become the shame of the family or group or whatever you want to put it as. And so it was very silent. Like I said, I had a public face and then I had my alone face. To go to, okay, repeat the second question that you had because there was some leading into that.
I wish I would have wrote that down.
Oh, I remember what it was. So like, because I had pushed everybody away, and so my husband died back in 2007. So suicide, like that was just really something nobody ever talked about. And even now, like a lot of people are just like, oh, they died, at their home or whatever it was. That stigma around the suicide. So honestly, what would have helped me at that point in time is if somebody would have reached out and said, hey, how are you doing? Even if it was on a daily basis. Hey, just checking in. How are things going? Because at that point in time, like I would feel like somebody cared. But I was such a raw person that when I really pushed people away, I really pushed people away. And so nobody felt like they could get close to me.
What about another thing I hear a lot around suicide is that, or suicide attempts or suicidal actions or motions, I guess, is that they're just attention seeking. That I've heard that a lot. Can you talk a little bit about that from a perspective of, what that person might be experiencing and how that affects them?
So my experiences with people who have, like they have a plan, or they've attempted, is it's not attention seeking. It's more so like I'm in a really dark place and I need somebody right now. I worked with a lot of those kind of people when I did peer support. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you're just a body there with them, not trying to fix it, not trying to fix them, not trying to get them to change their mind, but just being there with them and being in that emotion with them is all that somebody needs.
Right. Well, and for me, I think when it happened to someone very, very close to me, there were some indicators. There were some indicators that I don't know that I recognized in the beginning. And then there was the attempt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't even say that I think it was a weak attempt. I think it was an attempt. And I remember someone around me saying, "Oh, that was just attention seeking," and how frustrating that was, because it's almost like, in some ways it's a cry for help. In some ways it's saying like, "Hey, I feel like there's no other way out." But that stigma attached to it has made it so difficult, I think, for some to reach out for help. So doing what you do, I guess, can you talk a little bit about what's available maybe for people who don't have a whole lot of people around them that they can reach out to when they need some support or they need some help?
Absolutely. So 988, and the fact that they made that number so easy to remember is huge. Instead of 911, it's 988. That would be one of the go-tos. They can text, you can call them and talk to them. You can do whatever it is, because I know, through my experiences, oh gosh, I'm trying to think here now. It was probably 8 years ago that I started to struggle again, and I didn't want to talk to anybody, because even at that time for me, it was very, oh my gosh, like I can't even believe I'm thinking this. I'm so ashamed of myself. And so I didn't want to talk, but I was able to text, and that was huge, because sometimes you don't want to talk. There's also, you can always educate yourself. So I teach QPR, which is question, persuade, refer. And that's all about suicide prevention. So what questions to ask, how to persuade somebody to go get some help, and then what referral sources are within your community that you can refer them to. I also do mental health first aid for adults and first responders. And what that talks about is exactly what it says, mental health first aid. And so making sure that if you have somebody in crisis, these are the things to ask. These are the things to do. But my number one, and I preach this to everybody, is instead of planning for that crisis moment, what are we doing to take care of ourselves before that crisis? Right? Are we using our coping skills in our toolbox? Are we doing our daily wellness things like showering? Are we eating? Are we drinking, water? Or are you drinking your cup of coffee in the mornings? Like, are we doing that stuff to prevent us to get into that crisis? That's where I feel like things need to lead to, because if we can prevent, just by taking care of ourselves, what is that going to change in today's world, instead of it, oh my gosh, I'm in crisis, this is my only option because I feel alone, I feel like I'm a failure, or I feel worthless, or nobody wants me around.
Right.
So, yeah. And a great program is RAP. Jamie, you know RAP.
I do know RAP. I love RAP.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
Can you explain what RAP is?
Yes. So RAP it's called a Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And what it does is it identifies like tools to have in your toolbox. So like daily things that you need to do, or things that make you feel good. Like, I'm a car person. And so if I'm really, really struggling, I'm going to go to my car and I'm going to clean it, even if it doesn't need clean, or I'm going to do something like that, because that's where I find my happy place. It talks about what we're like when we're doing well. It talks about, and it teaches, like, you create different plans throughout this whole thing. So it's what I'm like when I'm well, what I'm like when things start to break down, what I'm like when things are breaking down. And then it goes through a 9-step crisis plan. So you actually plan out the crisis, and you identify people that you want there to be support. You identify places that you do and don't want to go. Medications, if you have animals, say like I have German Shepherds, and They're not, they're friendly as long as they know you. Right. But saying like I had to go into a facility for a while and I needed somebody to come feed my dogs. Well, I know that it's gonna have to be somebody that my dogs have met several times. So I wouldn't send Jamie over to my house to go feed my German Shepherds because that would not be good. So like you can choose all of that stuff in that crisis plan. And then it looks at the post-crisis plan. And so when we're in crisis, we say things, and sometimes it's very hurtful to people. So there's a section in there like people I need to apologize to. What went well with my crisis plan and what needs to be changed. I mean, it just, how am I going to return back to work? How am I going to, it breaks everything all down step by step. So you're not just trying to bite off this huge chunk and take on the world again, because you're going to kind of just, well, not kind of, it's a spiraling pattern and you're going to slip right back into that crisis again. So it's an amazing program. I think everybody should learn it. I use it to this day and I'm always changing my plan. So
yeah, me too. Well, and the cool thing about it, I really feel like it helps plan rather than be reactive. And when you're in a crisis and you're trying to react to things, that's when things go really wrong. If you have a plan ahead of time, then it's easier for people who are supporting us to support that plan also. And that kind of leads me into my next question, Amanda, is, I think one piece of wrap is how others know that I'm doing well or how others know that I'm struggling. And when it comes to suicide, I guess what can you tell people who might be concerned about a loved one or someone that they know? What kind of things do you need to watch for, and what kind of warning signs are there that may indicate that we need to take some action?
My number one that I always tell people is if somebody like they're very social and you talked every day or maybe every other day, or, you sent memes back and forth to each other, because that's a thing now. If that stops, or if you see somebody's attitude or I guess the way that they're acting in general just really shift, that would be a warning sign to me, a huge warning sign. Somebody who just repeatedly tells me, I'm good, or I'm fine, because we're so programmed to be like, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. That question, are you really good or are you really fine? But the most important part of asking those questions and really diving in is, one, make sure you have the time. Because if you're on like a 15-minute break and you're talking to a friend and they come out and say, hey, I'm in crisis, I'm thinking about suicide, then you don't want to be like, oh, I know this is really important, but I've got to let you go.
Right.
So making sure that you have that time, having the resources or knowing somebody that's got those resources is very, very important. And listen. Don't be on your phone. Don't be distracted by 50 million other things. Like, sit eye to eye and care and really listen to that person and what they're trying to tell you, because the hidden message is always in the way that we talk.
So, Amanda, you're touching on some things for me that, as I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you, I would hope that I would be able to respond to somebody the way that I hear you and Jamie talking to each other. But the fact of the matter is that because of the way I look at suicide, and I'm just going to say this very bluntly and boldly, is, just don't kill yourself. Like, to me, it's so simple, because I'm like, this is the ultimate act that you can do to yourself that's permanent, that you can't come back from, that hurts so many other people other than just yourself. It destroys lives. I mean, it just is a ripple effect that keeps going. I would be afraid that I would sit there and I would tell to someone and say, well, just don't kill yourself. Like, it's that easy. It's just don't do it. And as I hear you and Jamie talking, and I'm even saying that response out loud right now, how hollow and how sharp that is to somebody. If they just opened up and said, hey, I'm having suicidal thoughts, part of me would naturally full body clench and be like, okay, what do I do in this situation? Because I've never been put in it, for one. Two, I'm afraid my advice would be, well, just don't kill yourself. Like, there's a lot of things you can't avoid in life, but suicide seems to be one of those ones that you'd be able to put at the top that says, yeah, I can avoid that because I just won't kill myself. And so what advice would you give someone like me if I come up to that situation where someone's opening up and they're trying to talk to me, maybe they're not even being as bold as saying, hey, I'm having suicidal thoughts, but they're having some of these conversations, and I'm going to respond in a way that's like, hey, just don't do that. Like, that feels very hollow, but at the same time, I don't know how to equip myself to be better than that in that conversation.
That's really an honest question, because what do? If you've never experienced it and it seems so simple, like, okay, so then just don't do it. Do you know how many people you're going to hurt? Those kind of questions. If you were to come to somebody like that, I would tell you right off the bat, call 988, because just because you're not the one in crisis and thinking about dying by suicide doesn't mean that you cannot utilize that service yourself. And there's also several apps out there. Samsa's got an amazing app that you can put in like your zip code, and it'll pop up all kinds of resources in the area that are free that you can reach out to. And so somebody like you, if you were like, oh, what do I do? You can always call 988. You can reach out to those resources in the communities, and just stay with them. Like, that's the biggest thing, is being with them, because somebody who is suicidal is really feeling horribly alone and lost. And it hurts.
So, Amanda, are you saying that 988 doesn't just offer support for someone who is feeling suicidal, but also to loved ones who have someone that they're concerned about? They can support supporters also.
Absolutely. And they can give you some really good resources for your area, because they have access to all that stuff too.
Very good.
Okay, so I have another question. Amanda, I'm just going to be like rapid firing. Okay. So, I think it was last episode, maybe the episode before, we were talking about, with another person named Jen, and it was coming up around, how do you care for people, acquaintances or friends that, they're showing you signs of change, their personality's changing, their actions are changing. And how do you step up and show that you're there for them, even if you ask them, hey, how you're doing? And they're like, I'm fine. And everything's fine. And we even touched about, on the area of what if this person doesn't have a community to go back to? What if all they have is their acquaintances? Because I think one of the points of the conversation we had in the last episode was, well, you want to give that person respect and space, because depending on where you're at in a relationship with them, if you're not very close, or sometimes if you are close, or they're just acquaintances, you also don't want to overstep a boundary. And so I just want to take this opportunity and maybe kind of pick your brain a minute here too, to say, how would you advise somebody to navigate those waters? Because I have friends and I have acquaintances and I have family in my life where there are certain things I don't want to cross over, because that's a boundary that would not be well received. And I'm not even talking about suicide. And now you start adding the word suicide into that. It makes it really difficult to understand, when do we push and when do we realize it's really not that serious and we can kind of just let it be what it is, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying. So like, if it's an acquaintance and you're just kind of like, you seem a little off and I don't feel comfortable asking you because we don't know each other. It was like, is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, because, or even if you have somebody you do know a little bit more, but yeah, their behavior starts changing, but you ask them and you start probing where you can, but they tell you you're fine. Where do you, I know I'm not looking to you to give me an answer of like black and white, but this is the struggle that somebody like me would go through, is when do you know when to push versus when do you know just take it at face value? And again, if I assume they have other people in their lives that are going to be taking care of them, or they'll be able to reach out to, I may not push as hard, which is a missed opportunity in and of itself too. So I guess I'm just trying to work through that dynamic of how would you navigate those waters?
So I'm going to give you from my personal opinion, because that's the only experience I can really give you from on that area. But I always say go for it, because had somebody asked me from after my husband's death to, up to 5 years later. Are you thinking about suicide? 99.9% sure I would have told them yes. But not one person. And I know a lot of people, like I moved back to the community I grew up in. And that asked me. And so, like you said, it's a missed opportunity. And so I say, go for it. Just be like, hey, are you doing okay? I've even done it with a friend of mine who, yes, I'm just going to say it. He's in law enforcement and we were acquaintances. However, I heard of something that happened in the community and I knew that it would have a harsh effect on our police department here. And so I reached out via text every day. Hey, just checking in. How are you doing? I'd get the response. I'm okay. Things are fine. Whatever it is. And then one day I had sent that text and said, hey, how's it going? And I'm good. How are you? And I said, oh, on the greener side of the grass. So that's a good thing. And I got back a laughing emoji and I left a be. And then 15 minutes later, I got, Amanda, I'm not good. I'm just so used to responding I'm good that's how I respond anymore. I'm really struggling. And it was just me checking in, making that effort every day. Like, hey, you're on my thoughts right now. I just want to reach out and open up that line of communication. I'm here if you need me.
So much of that is just paying attention to those people around you. For me, that's kind of where I find my opportunity is just watch and pay attention to those people that aren't quite where they usually are. So,
and the other thing to think about too, really quick, while I'm thinking about this, for those people that are like, oh my gosh, I had this fleeting thought of suicide, and I'm not going to say anything to anybody because I don't want locked up. I don't want people to know. I would say probably 90% of the people in the United States have thought about suicide at one point in time in their life. That's not statistical. That's just my opinion. Because suicide, I read this book. It's called Rethinking Suicide. Amazing book. If you get the opportunity, it's on Audible, so you can listen to it or you can read it. But it really talks about, like, we always think that there's like a chemical imbalance in the brain, or they're suffering from depression, or there's some reason behind why someone died by suicide. When in fact, like, studies have shown, and this book goes into detail about it, that sometimes suicide is just an emotional reaction to something that's huge. So say my husband's death. I had to leave for safety reasons for me and my children. Okay, that was a huge life change. So the emotional part of it took over, just as my own experiences with my suicide ideation, because I never actually attempted, I was in such an emotional state and the pain was so bad at the time that I felt that was the only way to end it. So, I mean, if you really think about that, like, we can have a really, really bad, stressful day and we get home and the kids are being brats and the dog's being a butthead and like everything's going wrong and it's like, ugh, and you just, something like that could even trigger it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say it's so important to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so we don't get to that emotional point.
Right. I appreciate that you said that most people, it took me a long time, I think, to normalize that there have been times in my life where I thought, they'd be better off without me or whatever, whatever those thoughts are that go with that. And, I feel like there's such a stigma around this conversation, around this subject specifically, still even, that it makes us so uncomfortable to talk about. And to be fair, this is part of my work. It's part of my world on a daily basis. So, can you talk a little bit about ways that maybe we can reduce some of that stigma, make these conversations easier to have, and make ourselves a little more approachable for someone who might be struggling in this way?
Absolutely. So you're going to get a little bit of my pure brain here. Because to me, being that pure, so like being vulnerable, if you struggled with it, somebody who might be struggling with it is going to be more apt to come to you and talk to you and divulge that information, whereas like Mahlon, no offense, please don't take any offense to this. But like where Mahlon would be like, oh, what do you want me to do with it? Just don't kill yourself.
Mute her mic.
Jamie,
Everyone mute her mic. I'm just kidding.
Jamie, where you're more of like the open, compassionate, like you're more approachable. And so like when I talk to people, I've gone in and I've done presentations at schools. I've done presentations with law enforcement officers. I've done presentations with facilities and staff and organizations and all that stuff. And what I tell everybody is just say the word. Because the more that we try to avoid it, like killing yourself or, just the other little words that come along with it, just be like, hey, are you thinking about suicide right now?
So you're talking about like those little nuancy things that we say to avoid saying suicide. Like, are you going to hurt yourself? Are you thinking about doing something stupid? Those kind of things. Those are the language things that we need to avoid to help reduce the stigma around suicide.
Absolutely. Okay. And if somebody comes to you,
okay, so this is going to sound really crazy, Amanda, and I know we're just now getting to know each other. Jamie, this is old hat for you. But shouldn't there be a stigma around suicide? I mean, I understand talking about it's one thing, but shouldn't there be some sort of a stigma around suicide? Otherwise, and this is just where my brain goes, you don't want to over-normalize it to the fact that I don't want to say it's okay to commit suicide, but it becomes just palatable, more and more palatable. Because for me, to take my own life, I can't think of anything in this world that would be so severe for me to do that. But when I hear us saying, like, how do we, take the stigma away? How do we make it easier to talk about? I love that aspect of it. But my brain automatically goes to the point of, yeah, but there should be a stigma attached to suicide to some degree.
Before you answer, Amanda, I have to tell you, as soon as those words fell out of my face, I was waiting for Mahlon to be, shouldn't there be some stigma around suicide? So I apologize. That was my, I definitely meant the stigma around, just talking about it and normalizing it. You know what I mean? But go ahead, Amanda. You can answer Mahlon's question.
You let the genie out of the bottle. Sorry,
I did.
Jamie. So the question stands.
Okay. So let me ask you this right now. Has the stigma around suicide stopped suicide?
No.
Exactly. So what's the downfall to getting rid of that stigma or lessening it?
And again,
you're never going to be able to stop suicide.
Right. And I was going to say, talking about it, I am 100% supportive of that. And I was just going to say on the other side of that, how much has talking about it stopped suicide? Because I don't think we're ever going to eliminate suicide. I wish we could, but I just don't think we can. There's too many variables. There's too many criteria that could be falling in just at the right or the wrong moment, depending on which way you're looking at it. But I guess for me, like, when I hear the words to remove the stigma, again, talking about it's one thing, but I also don't want it to just be like when I talk to my children or I talk to a friend, like I want them to know the importance of what that means. And, obviously it is a little bit more than just saying, hey, I want to go for a bike ride. When you say, hey, I'm thinking of killing myself, like there should be a little bit more weight behind it. There should be a little bit of a stigma attached to it. There should be something and I'm looking at that as a barrier, something that doesn't make it as easy as much as that can be. But that's kind of what I'm looking for. Like, I don't want this to go into the vein of we're talking about it so openly now that it almost becomes watered down and it's just another thing that we deal with, if that makes sense, Amanda.
Absolutely. And to me, the more we talk about it, the more we educate people on it, the more vulnerable we are as survivors, because I'm a survivor of suicide. The more comfortable somebody who may be contemplating it will come to me and say, hey, I've been having these thoughts and this is where I'm at. Like, not only does it reduce that stigma, but it also opens it up so those people that are struggling know that, hey, this person might be safe to talk to. They're not going to think I'm crazy and just try to lock me up.
Well, and I do think too, part of when I think about stigma around suicide specifically, I think about the isolating factors in that, in those feelings of nobody really cares, no one is really here for me, and I'm all alone in this anyway, right? And so when I'm talking about like reducing stigma around suicide, part of it is that, so that people understand that there's not judgment around every corner, that there are people who really do care and want to support you through the difficult times. And that stigma of being able to say, hey, this is where I'm at and this is what I'm feeling, and being afraid to get help is part of why the conversations are important in my mind anyway.
So Amanda, I have a question for you, and I don't know if you know the answers, but do you know any kind of statistics or study that says the mix of people who commit suicide between being male and female? I'm just curious because I want to respond to what you just said there, Jamie, from my own personal lens. But I thought I'd ask you first, Amanda, do you know any kind of statistics around that, or even generality around, if more men commit suicide than women or vice versa?
So I know from the study, I believe it was a SAMHSA study, or not. It was oh my gosh. It was a C something. I can't even remember
CDC.
It right now.
The CDC.
Thank you.
Yes.
The CDC study. Who does not remember the CDC? Thank you, COVID.
It's been burned out of my mind. What are you talking about? I'm kidding.
Right. So women tend to attempt more, where men are more successful because they use more lethal means. And so the rates, I believe right now, the last study I had seen was like 10 to 14 as high risk, and then the elder middle-aged male. And then once you get past that, the 55 and up is a little bit higher than most, but don't quote me on that. I know it's 11 minutes. Somebody's dying by suicide. And then it breaks it down even more. But the CDC has all that information, all the statistics about suicide on there from their studies. And I think they've got the 2021 results out now.
They do.
Okay.
I saw it today.
Because my response to you, Jamie, about everything you said, which I'm not trying to say is wrong or right. Mm-hmm. I'm saying from my male point of view, you're requiring me to be more vulnerable than goes against my nature. I'm not a emotional, vulnerable person by trade. So everything you just said, I can't argue with it. If I put myself in that space for a minute, I'd say I'm never going to use any of those because that is going 100% against who I am as a person. So to me, it's like which made me ask the question, for men, and I'm generalizing here, but if the men that are not emotional, the women who are not emotional, I'm just wondering what else could we do that maybe they would be more apt to do rather than trying to get, rather than trying to go through an emotional way of handling this, that's not going to be what they're comfortable doing or even attempting. Is there another way around that we could handle it where we'd get the same result?
Is that a Jamie question or an Amanda question?
I was just going to say crickets.
I'm going to say it's Jamie and Amanda. Jamanda.
Wow, that's a new one. I guess a part of it for me, when I saw those statistics, and I don't know, I didn't get through in prep for this particular episode. I did do some looking at the CDC website and their statistics. I do know that, not too terribly long ago, I was reading more about like my state and the rates of suicide amongst men and women and the ages, and was so surprised to learn that it was like that middle-aged man that was a higher risk for suicide in my state than even like teens who you think are emotional and, irrational and impulsive. But it made me really think about how important it is as a society and as a whole to say, hey, everyone struggles and it's okay. And just because you're a strong, manly man, it doesn't mean that you don't hurt. And it doesn't mean that you don't have times where you struggle, and it's okay to reach out for help. And I think it's that prevention, to really set a different tone for men's mental health in our country as a whole, in order to help start shifting that space for men. Because, and we talked about this a while back with our friend Matt Carter from Australia, when we talked about toxic masculinity, about how it's too manly to say, it's not manly to say I'm hurting or I'm struggling or this isn't working for me. And so, addressing some of those stigmas around just men's mental health in general, I think is an important place for us to start as a society.
Well, and I'm not discounting or arguing with that. I think for me though, I even hear you say that, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. But at the same time, I'm also not going to be comfortable enough to be like, oh, you're right, that, let's remove the stigma of me sharing my emotions. But maybe it's about how do we focus on those individuals, male and female, who aren't emotional response, that don't respond emotionally. That's not their go-to mode of communication. Are there things that we can do? Like the first thing that jumps to my mind, I don't know why, but like adaptability. There's times where things happen in life where you get so set in your ways, or you get set to your day, your day to day, that when things start happening and starts off with the water heater breaks and the car goes out, then maybe you lose a job, or, things start piling on top of it. Maybe it's around just teaching people a set of coping skills, which I think is what I really kind of liked about that whole rap thing that you were talking about earlier. It almost teaches somebody to say, okay, or has them plan for, life is not going to go the way that you anticipated or way that you think it should. And so to me, it's more about, can we teach people how to be adaptable? Because I think that could be a key for me. Like if I was struggling with stuff and I went to somebody, instead of having them say, let's talk about your feelings, if they said, okay, well, how adaptable are you? Are you being adaptable? Are you being flexible in life, or are you being rigid? And because of that rigidness, now you're probably having feelings of things are getting out of control. You can't fix them, whatever. I'm just rambling at this point, but that's kind of what jumped in my mind, Jamie, is that to me, an emotional response wouldn't do anything, but give me something practical that I can do, that I can work towards. That's something that would probably hit me, the ground running.
Mm-hmm. Well, and actually, personal responsibility is a huge piece of wellness and recovery, and that's kind of what you're talking about, is like, I have some personal responsibility in being well. I have some personal responsibility in ensuring that my own social emotional needs are met, and that I have the tools that I need to deal with things in difficult times. And I think that's really great. Until you've experienced something you've never experienced before. And you've hit a rock bottom that you never expected to happen, because sometimes bad things happen that you don't plan for and you don't understand are coming or are even possible. So, I definitely think it's important to know that we have some resiliency skills, and, and I think you do. But I think there are people out there who don't even understand that there are resiliency skills available, One more thing I wanted to ask, Amanda, when we talk about the subject of suicide, is language is important, and the words that we use matter. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit, because one of the things, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but one of the things that I know is hard for a lot of people, and even me as a parent, as I was talking to my kids about these things and these hard subjects, was, please don't do anything stupid, or you're not going to hurt yourself, right? Those kind of statements aren't always super supportive or make it seem like you're very open. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about language, like what terms are appropriate, what terms are acceptable when we talk about suicide and subjects of suicide, and what should we avoid when we're talking to someone that we care about suicide?
So really quick, Mahlon, I had to look up the statistics because I'm a statistical person. So according to the CDC, in 2021, there was 48,183 suicides that were completed. Of those, 38,358 were male and 9,825 of those were female.
Wow.
So I don't know if that puts that into perspective at all for you.
It does.
Wow.
That's a lot.
The one thing I press, and you talked on it, the vulnerability, and I'm like, oh, you've never heard of Brene Brown? So she talks about, she actually has a TED Talk. It's called The Power of Vulnerability. The Power of Vulnerability is what it's called. It's like a 30-minute TED Talk thing. Very inspiring, very empowering, and it really opens up as like, oh, is that why I'm not okay being vulnerable with people? Like, so if you get an opportunity, I really, really would suggest listening to her.
You know, Amanda, I have to tell you that I have been working on Mahlon and have introduced him to Brene Brown.
Oh, please, Jamie. She mentioned it in a podcast. It's not like I'm your clay that you're
I
molding.
also sent you the video,
Please.
so don't pretend.
What's really funny is that our group, Jamie, that you know of, the Fun Havers, there is an individual in there. Her name is Carrie. She also brought up Brene Brown, and it was so funny to be able to have that conversation because of what we talked about on the podcast. And so I'm getting introduced to that, and I'm having that ability to go and kind of listen to some of the stuff that she's been saying. So I'm excited. I'm kind of going to go back and listen to that. So thanks, Amanda, for bringing that up.
It's a great TED Talk. I totally recommend. Highly recommend.
Yes. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, amen, sister. Like that woman preaches what I feel all the time. So I was not introduced to her until a couple of years ago, and my world has changed. I love it. Jamie, your question about like what words not to use and what words to use, you don't ever want to attach shame to it. So instead of saying, you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? Because that means like if I say yes, I'm going to be very ashamed of my response. So I'm going to tell you no. So again, the vulnerability piece. So saying no is much easier than dealing with the repercussions of if I say yes, then what are they going to think of me? What's the world going to think of me? What's going to happen to me? That kind of thing. And so instead of saying you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? You could say, so other people that I've been around that have dealt in similar situation, or even myself and what you're going through, like I experienced this. Are you thinking of, do you have a suicide plan? Do you have a plan to end your life? That kind of thing. Don't ever end a question with, are you? Because then it just causes that shame to build.
A shutdown. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
What about terms that are used currently, I guess, around? So I'm specifically trying to get you to a space where you can explain something to me that I don't even understand, and I work in it. So like the term committing suicide is not, I don't know, kosher, really acceptable. It's more, is it completing suicide? Like, can you talk around some of that? Like why one phrasing is better than another phrasing, and what the importance is of that?
Well, and Amanda, before you answer that, if I can tack onto what Jamie's just saying, that seems like it's a lot of splitting hairs. So for someone like me who's hearing you say that struggle, Jamie, it doesn't make sense to me that we would spend the time or the energy talking about committed suicide versus completing suicide. So if there is a difference to it, or if there is an importance to that, that's really going to be interesting for me to hear, because I heard you ask that question and I immediately thought to myself, why are you spending time splitting hairs? Does it really matter? So I just wanted you to know where my mind was at, Amanda, before you answered.
So, like Mahlon, if you were to come to me and be like, so I heard your husband committed suicide. So to me, commitment means like you've made a promise, you have made a goal of. So like the word committed is just tied to so many positive things. Like you committed to the NFL, you committed to your wife, you committed to your house by buying a house, you committed, like you make commitments throughout your entire life. And so people have tied the word committed to positive things. And so when you put committed in front of suicide, it just creates a stigma, and it just sounds really off. And so if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I heard your husband committed suicide, I would say, yes, my husband died by suicide. Died by suicide is kind of my way to go with things. And I don't know why. It's just a preference. Some people are just like, yep, it's committed suicide. Some people are, it's a completed suicide. It just depends on what walk of life you're in.
Okay. That's good to know, because I feel like I was corrected once when I was in a conversation that I had used the term committed suicide and was corrected with completed. And so I was just curious if you could explain that.
There's a huge stigma around the word committed and suicide.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that makes
Do they say that,
sense.
sorry, this is a sidebar, but do they say committed to like an insane asylum anymore? Like you were committed? Do they say that anymore? Or has that been changed? Anybody know?
I don't use that language, but I don't know that a lot of people are. There are still people who are forced into treatment facilities, but I don't know.
Hey, anyways, it's where my dark mind goes sometimes.
The one thing I just want people to remember is, so if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I've been thinking about suicide, or if it comes up in discussion, the way that you can kind of gauge the risk of it, and I'm not saying that it's a guarantee, and so always, like, if you don't know how to handle it, hand it off to somebody who does, or reach out to 988 and get, the information that you need, but find out their means. Find out if they have a specific plan, because if they have a specific plan and they have the means, we need to reduce the opportunity. And, hey, are you okay if I hold on to your medications for right now? Or, are you okay if I take your firearm for a little bit, or at least let me have the magazine or the bullets, or, however they say that's their means of dying, just to reduce it a little bit and give them a little bit more of a chance to be able to receive the help that they need.
So you mean like limiting access to the tools that they have decided they wanted to try and use?
Absolutely. And there's gun locks everywhere. People give them away for free. I know a lot of the gun stores here in the Midwest will give gun locks away for free.
Well, does the police station, I feel like our local police station has, or if not, the police station could probably point you to an agency that has some, right?
Absolutely. Any VA office always has them as well. They also carry, there's like medicine boxes. So a lot of the pharmacies have lock boxes for medications. So you can even do a lock box for free. That way it's not a financial burden on anybody, and that's a way to limit that access.
Now, I don't know, Mahlon, do you have anything else that you'd like to ask? I have one last question, but I'd like to save it for the end.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything else to say. I guess before you ask your last question, Jamie, and we wrap it up, Amanda, I just want to say personally thank you, because you've given me a couple of things here. I'm going to be completely transparent with you. I know I knew coming into this conversation that I didn't know a lot about suicide. As I mentioned, I've kind of lived outside of that bubble, and I haven't even had a chance to really look into something, a situation that was close to it. But I do want to say thank you to you, because you brought some things that I wasn't expecting that I can use myself. And again, I know where I'm at now. I'm probably not that safe person, or somebody that if they would come to me that I would be able to handle it as well as somebody who could. But what you did for me is you've given me a couple avenues, things that I can check. You've said 988. I'm going to look into that YouTube video that you mentioned, that whole, coming up with a plan. I just personally want to say thank you for kind of bringing those to my attention and bringing those in this conversation, because it's giving me a little bit of, it's equipping me a little bit with tools that I can start using. So if I'm ever in that situation, I could feel more comfortable than I would if somebody just started talking to me and I just blurt out of my mouth, well, just don't go kill yourself, right? Like there's more to it than that, or there needs to be more to it than that. So I'm really impressed with this conversation and what you were kind of able to provide me for things that I can work on and have tools at my beck and call. So before you ask your last question, Jamie, I just wanted to take that moment, Amanda, and say thank you for the conversation. I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I agree. I guess my last question for you, Amanda, is, as someone who has been in that space, and had those thoughts and had those feelings, if you could, anyone who's listening, who's in that space, if you could say one thing or communicate one bit of information to someone who's hurting and who's in that spot, what would you want to say?
Don't be ashamed to ask for help or to tell somebody about your thoughts. Because sometimes it can just be a fleeting thought, and that's okay. There's a lot of people that love you, even though it doesn't feel like that. And reaching out will help decrease some of that pain a little bit and bring you some light to that dark place.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough, Amanda, for hopping on here with us and being vulnerable and sharing, your experiences and your story and your expertise, and, living in the same community and working in the same spaces with you. I appreciate the work that you do, and the information that you bring regarding this topic. It's so important, and I just want to say thanks for that. So.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. So, if you or someone is struggling, and needing some support, please remember those resources. There's 988. That is, used to be called the Suicide Prevention Hotline. And now it is 988. You can, like Amanda said, you can text or call. Google is just 2 steps away. You can find their youth chat lines. There are all kinds of resources available. And most importantly, please reach out to someone a safe person that you can talk to for some support. But you matter and you're worth it, and we want you here tomorrow. So just thank everybody for listening, and thanks, Amanda, for coming. And we had a great conversation, and we'll see you next time here on Roundtable Mindset. Are you gonna say anything, Mahlon?
I'm just gonna say goodbye. Now this is my segment where I'm just going to take over. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999. Or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.